Welcome to the Balanced Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Matt Southam. Here, we delve into candid conversations with entrepreneurs, exploring both their business journey and their secrets to maintaining mental well-being. As we navigate the balance of ambition and inner peace, I hope you find insights, inspiration, and invaluable takeaways in every episode. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Tom. Welcome to Balanced Ambition podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I want to kick off, first of all, talking about your business. Obviously, it's called Human-Made. You do lots of WordPress and web applications. Like Human-Made, talk to me about the reason behind that name and why you say on your website humans are so important. But give me your background in your own words.
Sure. It's great to be here. Thanks for me inviting me on. The name Human-Made, I think, accurately reflects the importance that we place on like people, humans being at the center of everything we do. I think it was born out of a couple of different things. I think, number one, I wanted to create a company that really valued the people that it was hiring. That was really based on my own experience, kind of working at companies where I felt like that wasn't really the case, and that seeing that as being quite a wasteful thing, I suppose. Working at places that had great people, and to some degree wasn't getting the best of them because it wasn't trusting them and giving them the autonomy and like listening to them and setting them up for success. And so the first thing you do when you start a company is create somewhere you want to work, and that was where I wanted to work. And then I think the second piece of it was, I guess, right from the start, really being attracted to technology as something that makes people's lives better, right? That like the reason we do technology is ultimately for people, and so I'm really interested in technology from that perspective. What's the practical benefit of that technology to the people that are using it? How's it going to make people's lives better? That started for Human-Made, and me, even prior to founding the company, I was quite heavily involved in the open source space, where, I think a lot of similar motivation for people who are involved in open source. So I think a lot of open source ethos also, I guess, informed the early decisions and direction. And yeah, I'm very happy with the name. I was young when I came up with it. I founded Human-Made when I was pretty young, and I think it's aged pretty well, which is not true of all of the names that I had for things back then. And so I think that's kind of fortunate.
It almost seems almost more important, nowadays, sort of 13 years later, that actually lots of people see technology and I guess even, just web as a sort of, principle of like, hiding behind computer screens and, no one's doing anything. But actually behind all of this are humans. And actually, we still have the same need, the same interaction, I guess the same, basic human needs that we want, even whether we're working, directly with people or actually behind a screen with technology.
Exactly true. Yeah, I won't claim to have had any great, insight or prediction in terms of the direction that technology was going to go, but I think that that has worked very well for us. I think, like you said, it has actually become more important. And if anything, the name feels like it fits us better the longer time goes on, which is very nice. Not that I can certainly claim any foresight for that, necessarily.
I think you should. But talk to me quickly about AI then, because actually I guess that's probably the seamless link that lots of people at the moment are talking about AI and how that's all going to come in and how it's going to work with humans. What's your sort of take on the future of AI and humans and the work that you do?
Certainly, I think first of all, the way I approach thinking about it really is from that kind of human first. I think what's exciting about AI and what is getting people excited about AI is its ability to have quite a transformative impact on the people who are using it, right? That this idea of like AI as a co-pilot or as an assistant, as a tool that can enable you a person to do things that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do, be more creative, definitely create things that you perhaps wouldn't have otherwise had the skills or the knowledge to program or to use a Photoshop or what have you. That side of it I think is really exciting. It seems like it could be a really democratizing technology when it comes to enabling people to do things that prior required a lot of specialist skill. And I think that on the flip side, the risks also from a human point of view, the kind of disruptive risks of instead of enabling people to do even more than they would have done before, it actually does things for them, and so then you no longer need those people to do the jobs that they were doing prior, or even perhaps some of the more existential risk stuff that also I think is a big part of the current debate. In terms of the work we're doing, and I guess our focus, I think that's much more on the kind of tools improving the things we're currently doing. Most of the practical applications of AI as it exists today are, they help you program a bit better, they help you write a bit better, they help you produce like images that you perhaps otherwise wouldn't have been able to produce. They can make you a bit more productive, a bit faster. I think that's, really interesting. And most of the existential risk stuff, I think, is worries about where it could go in the future rather than what we're seeing today. And so, it's very relevant to our field, I suppose. We're helping our clients with like large CMS migrations and complex enterprise content workflows, and ultimately, building websites. And there's quite a lot of ways, even just with the technology as it exists, that they can do that like better and faster than they could before. I think there's also a kind of a class of problems that, to some degree, you couldn't really do previously, or you couldn't do very well, which AI now kind of makes possible. And so, I mean, even things like the assistant on your phone, like a Siri or a Google assistant or whatever, those have always had much more potential than has been realized. And it seems quite clear now that actually, if you just plug in one of these LLMs, you'll actually be able to have a conversation with your phone, and it'll actually be able to do things, and that'll work in a way that it's never really worked before. I think there's a whole bunch of those in kind of web and CMS too, ingest all of our content on our website and suggest our titles for new articles, or categorize them in a way that makes sense. Again, lots of those things have been tried in the past, and there's heuristics and algorithms and approaches. None of it's ever worked that great. And it's all been quite heavy and complex. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I think, speeding up some of the processes and speeding up some of the things that humans could do. You mentioned Photoshop, and, just adding things in or removing things, the AI within there is superb. It's one thing that, has reduced the pain point of paying for Adobe each month and these huge license costs, just because actually now it's really brought some added bits. But equally, exactly like you're saying about the AI that we use on a day-to-day life, whether it's running Google Maps, and actually the artificial intelligence has worked out that actually there's some traffic jams there, and actually this is going to be a better route. This is good AI. This is helpful, and I think we're hearing all of the some of the negative side of what could happen, but actually the power is there for some real benefits to just the way we run our lives, and I guess AI is already integrated within our lives. It's not going to go away. It's just making sure, I guess, it's used in the right way.
Yeah, I think so. I think some of those, I would worry about the macro incentives maybe, that might drive some of those worst case outcomes around. Individually, we're driven to use AI to our own benefit, and so that makes sense. But perhaps from a capitalism point of view, or from a geopolitical point of view, there's different incentives there that might actually lead to replacing people. It's attractive it's not attractive to an individual to replace yourself in your job. But it's attractive for a company maybe to want to do that, or for a market to want to do that. And so, the degree to which these tools are built to enable people, and then people get to decide what to do with them, seems important to me. And I've been quite, I think the debate seems to be being taken quite seriously by all of the players, which is quite interesting and to see, and I think is a positive step. I can't think really of prior technological advances there being quite such a commitment to safety and the technology being a positive, having a positive impact on humanity. Like I don't think we had this from the social media tech giants when they were inventing social media, for example. I think they ran as fast as they could towards growth and ignored everything else. And I don't see the AI companies doing that to their credit, or the kind of tech leaders at the helm of them. So that's quite, I think that's quite a positive.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, there has been some good discussions about it. And like you say, with the tech companies discovering what could be done, what protocols do we need to put inside. And actually, you mentioned social media there. Actually, that conversation probably should have happened much earlier on. I think we're now starting to see some of the damage is maybe a little bit of a harsh word, but some of the impact that actually social media is having on, I guess, people's mental well-being, and certainly of the younger generation, of what they're being influenced by. What's your sort of take on social media as a whole? I know that's probably a whole episode in itself, but
sure.
Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fairly pessimistic overall, to be honest, having lived through it. I'm fairly nostalgic for the old days of the open web. Obviously being a part of the kind of WordPress open source community and I guess growing up in that web 2.0 era before the big platforms. I think overall the dream of the web as it was back then wasn't realized, wasn't best realized through these large centralized platforms that ultimately existed to engage people. And I think concerned about the ad model, advertising being the primary funding model for the web. I think that has a bunch of concerning incentives around engagement and whatnot. Again, I think we're seeing a little bit of a, I think we've peaked. I think there's been peak social, peak large platform, or at least I'm hopeful of that. That the for a long time, people just didn't know that that's what was going on, or if they did, they didn't care so much because we hadn't really seen the downsides yet. It feels like people are becoming more sophisticated in their understanding of the trade-offs there, and this shift away from, I guess, engagement-based social media to like messaging, and I still hope for a switch back to the old days of blogging, and I don't know, the friendly, decentralized kind of open web as it existed back then. Perhaps that's a little bit wishful thinking.
I think they're fair comments. I think it's, we are still all learning that actually if the product is free, probably we're the product. With the social platforms, they are an advertising platform. The algorithms, the way they work, there's an argument of the algorithm showing you what you want to see, but actually is it showing you what you want to see because you've already been shown it? And actually, that's where your mindset is. So there's lots to discuss in there.
We've kind of turned the web into like, I don't know, junk food really. Which is a shame. I don't think that's doing us serving anyone as in the way that we hoped the web would. We saw junk food advertising, but positive when it comes to the open web, and I don't think that dream's totally died. And it is good to see some of those larger platforms like struggling a bit and new things popping up to replace them.
Yeah, I think things do go round in circles, and actually I tend to agree with that. That I think there is some opportunities that people are starting to move back towards other systems and so on. But talk me through your journey then with WordPress and open source, and how you've got to working with some massive organizations within your business. Tell me how that sort of come about in your background.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it starts really, as a hobbyist web designer back at kind of I don't know, 15 or 16 years of age or something. I guess I was kind of online at that age back then as it existed. And probably a fairly typical start for people who cut their teeth in that era. It was a hobby, and then I was building sites for friends of my dad and that kind of thing. And kind of, the early technology of the time, I was kind of a quiet part of, I guess, the web standards movement was happening, and there was like a kind of brick pack of version of that was happening over in the UK where I was at the time. And so I was quite taken with that. And then WordPress came along in 2003. I didn't really start, become aware of it and start using it until 2006 or something. And I started freelancing as a web designer then, and using WordPress. And that, that at that time, WordPress obviously was a blogging platform, but there was just starting even 3 or 4 or years in, there were just starting to be larger companies who were looking at using it either for their own blogging initiatives or even as an early CMS. And sorry, I can just hear children shouting in the
That's
other
all
room.
right. Don't worry about that.
A little look. And so, really very fortunately, looking back, I just happened to work on some of those early large-scale WordPress projects. Back when there really weren't any other examples of that or many other examples of that. And so that gave me like an early portfolio of fairly enterprisey clients who were using WordPress for one thing or another. And so then as WordPress grew, I essentially grew alongside it and became too busy. I drafted in Joe, my brother, who was then freelancing with me, and then that led to us in 2010 getting so busy we wanted to hire somebody. And so then we had to found a company to do so. So we founded Human-Made Limited back in 2010, and we hired our first employee. And I would say the first, 5 or 6 years then of that journey, it really was just like WordPress was exploding, and we'd had this, we were lucky to just get in very early. And so we became known early on as, if you're trying to do something really serious with WordPress, these are the people you should speak to. And our, I guess as we grew the team, I think we had another insight, which was WordPress is an open source project. So there were lots of great developers who were volunteering their time to build the core software. And surprisingly, most of them weren't earning a living doing WordPress. Certainly a lot of them weren't earning a living doing WordPress, and they would love to do so, but perhaps they were working their evenings and weekends, volunteering their time, or they were trying to freelance and balance that with contributing back. And so we could hire these people directly, and then pair them with some of the most complex WordPress projects that existed, that these companies were wanting to do. And so that was like a great match, really. And I think again, fueled our growth for that first kind of 5 years or so, where we were hiring the people who were building the software. We could contribute their time back, and also they were the people you needed if you were a Siemens or a Sony or a Disney or something who were wanting to use WordPress. You probably needed to work with those people anyway, because you were pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the software, and so having the people who'd actually built it was really useful. I mean, that's
quite an exciting time, and a bit of WordPress background and how it developed. Obviously, I would have said maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more, it did come under a little bit of stick as the CMS that suffered from security issues and things like that. And I mean, I guess it's a little bit like, when something becomes popular, give a little bit of background. I recently had a talk with someone who does, van security, and what they were actually saying is vans aren't inherently, insecure. It's just the most popular models. What happens is the thieves go for those because they learn how to break into a full transit, because it's the most popular van. So if you're going to attack something, you learn how to do a full transit. And I guess my feeling is, as WordPress grew, it became the big CMS. So therefore, that was what people went for. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, definitely as WordPress became the most popular CMS, now I think it's something like 43% of all websites on the internet run WordPress. It's very, and that's like, the 10 times more than the second number 2 or something.
Yeah.
So it's by far the market leader, and there's almost no one else in the race really at that point. I think originally it was not built as a piece of enterprise software. It was built as a hobbyist blogging platform, and so it didn't have the security of an enterprise platform. And so as it started to be used for bigger things, security issues were discovered, and those did need to be fixed. But of course, you get it grew really from being a hobbyist blogging platform into a viable CMS. Perhaps over that first 5 years. Of course, the reputation ends up lagging behind.
Yeah.
It's in all of its competitors' interest to talk up the fact that it was a blogging software and its security isn't great. Long after that, continues to be true. And so I think WordPress has, for a long time had to push back against that reputation and that FUD. The reality is that at the time people are saying that, there's already hundreds of examples of huge sites that are run on WordPress where security is obviously very important, like NASA or the White House, or Number 10 was on WordPress for a while, or FTSE 100 banks, or what have you. And so it's usually fairly easy once you're in a conversation with somebody to allay those fears, because there's you can just drown them
Clear evidence,
amazing examples. I think another challenge, especially that enterprise companies can have, is that because WordPress is open source, the core software itself is got an amazing security. It's very secure now. And like open source really plays into that, right? You've got hundreds of developers looking at the source code all the time, and so if ever security things just get discovered and fixed very, very quickly.
Very, very quickly.
But because it's a decentralized ecosystem and a community, there are hundreds and there are tens of thousands of plugins and tens of thousands of themes, and those can be written by anybody. And so there you do have, there's still much more of a, there's lots of hobbyist plugins and plugins written by one person that's great for their site, but again, perhaps you wouldn't want to run if you were a bank or something.
No.
And so that can be an area where our enterprise customers need some help. What can I use from this ecosystem that's appropriate for me as a large enterprise, and what should I, what isn't really appropriate for me, and so I think that that's an area. The core software, I think has been secure for a long time now, but that wider ecosystem still takes a bit of navigating.
I guess it takes time for things to catch up, or people to blame the right part. You hear it in every industry. One thing breaks and something else gets the blame. But actually, if there's a plugin that you haven't updated in years and actually was left, then actually when your site comes into a bit of trouble, it wasn't WordPress, it was the plugin that's left the door open. You just don't
usually these days, I can't think of the last time off the top of my head when that wasn't the case, that there was a security issue, someone's running WordPress, and actually what it turns out to have been is that they were running a plugin that was written by who knows who, and perhaps not updated in a long time. Again, to some degree, that is WordPress's problem to solve. It has this plugin model. It allows all of those plugins to exist. So I think it is fair that ultimately accrues to WordPress's reputation. And it's not the same as the core software itself having security, what have you.
So I guess the question there, or that one of the solutions, is actually ensuring that if you've got a website, making sure it's well maintained and looked after. A website isn't just a one-time job; it's a continuation. If you've got a business asset, which is what your website is that your take on things?
Yeah, ultimately, if you're going to choose to use open source software, then the benefits of that: you own your own platform, you own your own data, you have much more flexibility, and you can benefit from things like the superior security of an open source platform versus a closed source platform. The trade-off is you've got to take a bit more responsibility for keeping that platform up to date, making sure that you're updating your plugins and your dependencies or you've got to work with someone who's going to take care of that for you, which is, ultimately one of the benefits that we're bringing to our clients is like they want to use WordPress because they like those things about it. But they would need to use in a way that's safe and is going to like meet their enterprise requirements. And so that's something that we can do for them. Yeah.
Brilliant. So during the last 13 years, you've gone from, a freelancer yourself and your brother, and then bringing in one member of staff and so on and so on. And you're now, what about 70 strong?
Yeah, about
across the globe. So what challenges has that brought, and what have you learned from growing a business?
Yeah, I mean, lots of challenges and lots of learnings. And so to some degree, where to start? I mean, a consequential early decision for us was that we were going to be a distributed company, a remote company. That was, some of that was born out of the open source community that we were a part of, which is in itself distributed. You're collaborating as a volunteer with people who are all over the world to build software. And so it kind of, given part of our plan was to hire some of those people, it made sense to essentially adopt the same operating model. And grow the company in a distributed way. That brings challenges, especially around management and organization. You've got people who are on different time zones and who were working different hours to each other. So I think early on we had a focus there on, I guess making sure we had enough overlap between the people. So, okay, we're going to hire someone on the west coast of the US. Ideally, we would also then get someone on the east coast. And then we've got someone in the UK. And so each of those people have got 4 hours of overlap with someone else or something. Yeah. And so I remember I used to have this map of the company that I was trying to fill in the gaps to some degree. So that, there wasn't this sense of, oh, I'm out here working on this time zone that's like different from the rest of the company. Everyone else works on the UK time zone and I work out on my own. And that's much more difficult when you're starting out, of course, because there's so few of you. It's very difficult to cover time zones. And we actually did start out with quite an extreme spread. I think we had someone in Portland, a couple of people in the UK, someone in Australia, and then we acquired a small agency in Australia like 2 or 3 years in. And so for a while there, we actually were too distributed. And we had to be intentional about hiring to fill in those gaps and scale our way out of the problem to some degree. The larger you get, the more people you've got spread across time zones, the easier it becomes for them to form smaller teams that are somewhat on similar time zones. And so that's, less isolating and requires less out of hours working and all of that.
And I guess when the team grew, yes, it solved the problem that actually there was some crossover. But then I guess you're trying to manage people across a huge time zone. And how, as a leader, did you manage that and ensure that people actually they felt involved and that they weren't just left out on a limb because actually they were working and you were sleeping?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I always viewed remote as like a useful constraint, and thought about, well, how can we turn that to into something that then I guess incentivizes better ways of working. And so I think I came into starting the company with this belief that if you hired really great people and built a very high trust environment, and gave them a lot of autonomy, that in return you could get a lot of responsibility and accountability out of them. So that's been quite core to our how we've worked, really right from the beginning, that you're going to need to take a lot of responsibility because there's not some, we can't see what you're doing. Really, we can just see the output you work. We don't know when you're working necessarily. And so you get a lot of autonomy. You're going to, and you're going to need to take a lot of initiative and take a lot of responsibility for delivering whatever it is you're responsible for delivering. And so I think having that just as a cultural value, really, that a trade-off. We're going to give you a lot of autonomy. We're going to expect a lot of responsibility in return. That served us definitely very well. Maybe up to 20 people or something, where really you can just optimize your hiring for those kinds of people, and it's up until 20 odd people or something perhaps even a little bit more for us actually. You don't need much process or structure other than that, as long as everybody is taking a lot of responsibility and is able to self-manage. Then that worked really great for us, and that was what we got in return was like we were able to be very efficient, very low overhead, very low process, very high trust, which are all things I really like. I really like to work in that kind of environment. As you scale beyond that, you do start to need support and management and structure, and so we've been through multiple iterations of that over the years. Think of another kind of, I guess, an aspect of that or something we've learned around that. I think the challenges of managing people across time zone and of working together as a team. Early on we tried to have leadership roles be spread across the globe with the idea that you would want, it would be nice if there were leadership roles in each of the regions that we've got people in. What we actually found is that just makes it very hard to work together as a leadership team, because it's difficult to all get on a call at the same time, or have the kind of like high bandwidth, the kind of positive conflicts kind of conversations, and so I think that's something that we tried quite hard at that for a few years before we eventually like consolidated leadership on closer set of time zones and really focused on the prime, the thing the company needs from us as a leadership team the most is that we're working together very effectively as a leadership team, and that we're going to optimize for that. And that really reflected our learnings in the rest of the company. Like I remember early on, we would win a client that was in the US and we would have like someone in Europe and someone in Australia who are working on that project. And that's like very, over time, we learned that that's very difficult. And now we are more regionally based. US clients tend to be worked on by our US team, and we have US sales and US account management, US project management, US engineering, and they can form they're still spread across the time zones of the US, or some are in the South America and North America, and maybe there's some overlap from Europe into the East Coast because there is good overlap there, but broadly we're delivering regionally. And so, what we discovered to be true for the delivery teams makes sense for them to be working in one location, one geography. Same for us as the leadership team too.
Yeah, actually being able to be together, be able to talk to each other, that human-led approach. Because if you never talk to anyone else on the team, then I guess you drop a bit of the human side, which was one of the driving factors of building the company from the start.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how did you?
Very true.
Balance that for yourself, but knowing that actually, that there might be problems in other areas. It was a different time zone. How did you always, keep in touch and just ensure that, I guess, the business built and grew as you originally envisioned? I guess it's the vision has changed as it's gone on, but back to the core of being about people.
A really important part of, I think, building a close-knit, globally distributed team, which there's an obvious tension there. Like just meeting up in person is a really important part of that. And so right from the beginning, we have whole company meetups, at least once a year. And then, teams themselves or individuals in the company are meeting up more regularly than that. Perhaps they're attending a conference together, or they're co-working for a week, or they're going to a client kickoff. So I think those actually serve as really important, like culture building, human connection building moments. I think without those, it would be much more difficult. We got a little bit of a taste of that through the pandemic, where we couldn't have a retreat for almost 3 years. And so we kind of got a sense of this is what it'd be like if we tried to run a distributed company where we were never meeting up. We had people who joined us during the pandemic and worked with us for 2 years without us ever meeting them in real life, in person. So I think that's a really important part of it. I think also, right from the beginning, again, that constraint of we're remote, we're distributed, and so we're not seeing each other. The human connection and like company culture that just forms organically if you're all in the same place is not going to form organically. So therefore, we need to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
And so, ultimately, I think actually then by being intentional, you can create a better one than if you'd let it happen organically. And so
is that sort of the culture, I guess, that you establish? You've worked on that side to ensure actually everyone's bought in on that the culture of the company.
Yeah, I was always worried really from an early on in the company that what I didn't want to build was just a group of freelancers that happened to work together on projects. I really wanted it to mean something to work for Human-Made, for people to really feel attached to the company and proud to work for the company and to know what it meant to be at Human-Made, and for clients to know what it meant to work with Human-Made, and for that to be something. Being distributed means you've just got to be quite intentional about defining what that is, describing what that is, getting people together, creating opportunities for that to kind of be intentionally reinforced. And so I think Meetup's a big part of that. I think something we again from the kind of WordPress open source community that we really benefited from was this tradition of WordCamps, which are grassroots organized WordPress conferences. And there really used to be like one of them at least a week somewhere in the world. Most cities, most capital cities would have one. In larger countries, there'd be, several other cities that would have one per year. And so you just ended up with lots of them on all the time. And really the WordPress community as a distributed community, that was its meetups. It would meet up, and that's where the culture of the WordPress community was formed and strengthened. And so as a company, we were benefiting a lot from that. Human-Made people would meet up at WordCamps constantly. And I think those were quite a powerful force for us, actually. When I look back, people could go to these WordPress community events, they could meet up with their colleagues, they were proud to work for the company, and that was reinforced because they were meeting other people who were asking what it was like, and there's a cachet to working with the kinds of clients we work with within that community. So that became quite a special thing. And we've got, I think we've got quite good branding and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think all of that really worked very well. Again, through the pandemic, not only could we not meet up and do our like whole company retreat, but those WordCamps dropped away as well. And so, and they, they've come back now, but in a much, there are much fewer of them actually than there were. And so, we've been having to come up with other ways, where perhaps we were getting that for free a little bit without realizing it, I think, for those first few years. And now that now there's less of that, that's something we've got to put things in place to replace, I think. Yeah.
What have been your personal learnings, I guess, in growing a business? What have been things along the way that you would have done differently or changed if with a bit of hindsight, which is always a fantastic thing, but where have there been challenges that you thought, if I'd solved something 2 years ago or not gone down this route, where would that have?
I mean, there's lots of them. There's been lots of things that we've stumbled our way through and learned a lot. To some, I guess, because we had started out as a distributed company and with this kind of human-first approach, which was somewhat non-standard back then. We've made up a lot of stuff ourselves. And I think had that as a point of pride. So I think one of the things I learn is that you can do that too much, that existing business best practice has its value, and so I think that's something I would have benefited from. I didn't really have any, I didn't have many real jobs before I did this, and so we had a little bit of a we were the bit of the continent that broke away 100 million years ago, and we've reinvented everything from first principles rather than going and reading the book or something. So I think that's something we're we've shifted quite a bit on, just in terms of like, oh, there's a best practice for this. Let's like adopt that first and then adapt it to what we need, rather than rejecting it out of
stubbornness
that yeah, exactly.
we're not doing the traditional business method, or business way. Yeah.
We were very flat early on as an organization. It was a long time before we introduced really a leadership tier. There was like obviously me and my brother and Noel, the other founder of the company. So 3 of us as founders, but other than that, there was no other hierarchy, and we were very egalitarian in our approach, and so it was a very flat hierarchy, probably until like 40 odd people or something, which was pretty late, and we had this kind of organized chaos or something, really just 40 people all taking a lot of autonomy, and somehow a lot of magic happened out of that. But again, I think that we've come quite a long way in terms of building out leadership and accountability and some amount of hierarchy. And I think we would have benefited from doing that a little earlier, being a bit more intentional about that early on, rather than letting it. I think there were quite a few of those milestones that you go through as a company where maybe you get to 20 people, and then now suddenly you need HR and project management and structure, and then you get to 50 people, and now you need middle management. And I think we were quite late to each of those milestones. I think because we had hired fairly senior people and given them a lot of autonomy, and that they were taking a lot of responsibility, that actually enabled us to push past those milestones. But it also gave us perhaps a little bit of a false sense of like, oh, we're just going to be fine. We're going to be able to do work like this forever. We don't need those things. But actually, it's just that we realized that we did need them perhaps 10 hires later than our peers or something. We could get away with it for a bit longer. And so, I think now we've got a bit more of a traditional structure, really, with us as a small exec team and a slightly broader leadership team around them, and more organization and more clarity of roles. Again, we used to have very fluid roles in those early days. As we've grown as a company and been around for longer, and the people who are here, understandably, over time, want to understand, well, what's the career path here, and all of that. You then have to build. You
sort of learn that as you go. That actually, people coming to work for you, that's what they want to hear and what they want to know.
Right.
So what would be
exactly.
Finish off today? What would be your tip to someone starting out in the maybe within your industry, or perhaps just building a business, especially one that's starting off by being remote? What's something you would love to have known when you were starting out that you could share with someone else?
I think a couple of things. One is like, don't be afraid to be really quite ambitious. I think that's something that I see when I'm talking to people who are starting companies fresh today, especially in the agency space that we're in. Kind of an assumption that the big agencies must have stuff really figured out that they don't, or that, that their ambition is, I'd love to grow to 5 people and make enough to, make enough of a salary for myself or something. I think you can just aim much higher than that. That actually the everyone really is just making it up. And all of these companies that look amazing from the outside are pretty chaos actually, and are making tons of mistakes inside, internally. And so I think you can take some comfort in that when you're running your own company and you're finding that it's chaos all the time and half the stuff's breaking, and you can. It's really easy to think, God, we seem to be really struggling and everybody else is doing really well, but over time, I've learned that that's just totally not true. Everyone's really struggling. Everything's chaos. Sometimes things go well, but for a bit, and that's great. And that, there's a lot of luck involved in all of that. So I think that you can, if you just accept all of that, actually, you can be quite ambitious. And I think that's something that served us pretty well in the WordPress space, kind of growing the size we've grown and working with the size of client that we work with is, just like, I guess, not being afraid to take that on, not being afraid to think, well, why couldn't we build WordPress websites for Disney? Let's, of course we could, let's do it.
Yeah.
Not just kind of, I guess,
not limiting yourself by those, preconceived conceptions of what actually goes on in a bigger agency when you're just a small agency or even just a sole freelancer,
Yeah. And like everything moves so fast as well, especially in our space, that like, that just inherently by being smaller, you already have a lot of advantages because you can just move so much quicker. And so, that actually is worth a lot. It's very difficult as a larger company to move quickly enough. I notice that's harder for us these days to adopt the new things that WordPress is doing than it was when we were small. When we were small, we could be way ahead of the curve. Now we have to
can be really agile and flexible,
a plan and train people, and some people don't want to do it, and all of that, which is and so again, that just like there's much more room to be disruptive. I think the second thing I would say is that I've learned over my years doing this is that I think a large part of success is like keeping on doing it, being still being around, like I'm now, we're 13, 14 years in, lots of the agencies that were founded by around the same time as us are no longer running. There's lots of friends who founded agencies and that are no longer around. And so, to some degree, at times I thought they were doing better than us, so yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in just keeping going. If you keep going and you're still in it, you're doing pretty well. And so
keep turning up.
Don't give up.
Keep turning up.
Keep turning up. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Iterative improvement leads to large change over time.
Yeah.
There we go.
Tom, I really appreciate your time today and the insights that you've provided. Thank you very much for joining me. I wish you all the best in the continued growth of the company. I'm expecting actually there will be some further growth with you, and wishing you all the best of luck.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed being on and enjoyed the chat. So best of luck with the podcast. I'll be following along, and thanks very much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Balanced Ambition podcast. I genuinely hope the stories inspire you as much as they inspire me. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a friend. And remember, by subscribing, you won't miss an episode, and it would truly mean the world to me. Stay balanced, and I'll see you next time.